Hey, everybody. It's showtime. You ready? We're awful glad to see you. I'll be right back.
Lift up your eyes, lift up your voice, come to the great reunion. Give us your hand, join in our band. You are the union. Lift up your eyes, lift up your voice, come to the great reunion. Give us your hand, join in our band. You are the union.
Well, god damn. I'm in heaven, singing along with a heavenly choir of angels, and we're singing union songs and coming to you live streaming through YouTube. How the hell did this ever happen? Some non-union switchman on that railway to heaven everyone's always talking about must have gotten his signals mixed up mighty bad. Probably drinking on the job. Boss, looking the other way because that damn scab was slipping him $5 every payday. Well, you can imagine my shock the minute I realized where I'd been sent. I said to St. Peter, you've got to do something about this. There has been a terrible mistake. I can't be stuck up here for eternity without any of my friends to talk to. No, mother, he said. He called me mother, just like all my boys do. We don't make mistakes up here like you do down on earth. We've got pretty good divine judgment, all in all. Now, he said, who would you like to see first? That's what most people want to do the minute they get here, see their loved ones again. I'll see my loved ones soon enough. Right now, I want to see John D. Rockefeller. I've got a thing or two to say to him about that Ludlow massacre he ordered where so many women and children were murdered by the gun thugs and the National Guard. St. Peter folds his arms across his chest, looks me straight in the eye. I see he's telling the truth. John D. Not here. That's when it hits me. I'm not in hell, where every sold-out prosecutor and political pimp in West Virginia said I was going. I am in Heaven. It's not at all like what they tell you about in Sunday school. There's no wings and no robes. You get to wear the clothes that you wore back down on earth, the ones you're comfortable in. They do wash and iron them for you every day, which you do get used to. That is a nice heavenly touch. Just look at this place. Right, our Lord did say, I go to prepare a place for you, but who knew this was what he meant? All this time I've been living and working down on earth, he's been up here building me this beautiful Irish pub. That's right. Just for when I get thirsty, of course. Wait till you see the beautiful house he's built for me just on the other side of that cloud. Well, it's no surprise our Lord could do that. His old man was a carpenter, after all, when he wasn't wandering the countryside looking for a cheap hotel. The kid would have picked up a thing or two along the way. That musician, Not only is he the best looking man I've laid eyes on since I met George Jones so many years ago, he's in the Musicians Union. Oh, I love heaven. Here's the most amazing thing. This pub is identical to Blackjack Kehoe's Tavern, up in Gerardville, in the heart of the Pennsylvania anthracite fields, where I used to spend so much time. Oh, I like a good drink as much as anyone, and I'm willing to walk a good long way to get one if I have to. It's at that time I was in prison. It was in West Virginia, in Pratt, the nearest town to the Paint Creek mines, where my boys were out on strike. Well, it wasn't exactly a prison. It was a boarding house run by a woman named Isabel Carney. But surely I was a prisoner, even in that boarding house, sentenced by the damned judge at the governor's request, of course, under armed guard, night and day. Well, unfortunately, they don't serve beer in prison. At least not in any of the prisons I've ever been in. So after a couple of weeks, I had developed a powerful thirst. Well, the evening guard, he was a middle-aged fellow, not like you, good looking too. He liked me a lot, if you know what I mean, even though I was about 20 years older than he was. Well, he came from a long line of union miners, and he knew all about Mother Jones. One night, after Mrs. Carney had gone to sleep, me and the guard, we slipped out together, walked 2 miles from Pratt to Hanford, found a bar, sat down, drank the place near half dry, and then walked back again, just like that. In those days, labor leaders were radicals. That's because they came from the rank and file, out of the mill, up from the mine, off the slaughterhouse floor. They served their union and their fellow members for a couple of years, and then they went back to the shop, to whatever workplace they came from, took up their pick and shovel, their peg and all, their wrenches and boning knives, and went back to work. Blackjack Kehoe is that kind of labor leader. Well, he was the head of the Sons of Molly Maguire, a secret organization of Irish coal miners in Pennsylvania in the 1870s. Yeah. Now there was a real man. Not like the so-called leaders we've got in the labor movement today. Oh. King of the Mollies, they called him. Now, if you and I had been drinking together back in June 20th of 1877, you'd know what I was talking about. This place looks a lot like Jack's Tavern. Only here they won't let you spit tobacco juice on the floor. Well, of course, the floor in Jack's establishment was just a layer of sawdust on top of tamped clay, and whatever spilt beer and tobacco juice didn't soak in, you just swept up and out the door the next morning, or, well, the next afternoon, however long it took the bartender to wake up and get sober. But Jack wouldn't have been there to pour our drinks. No, he was sitting in prison, staring at the wall, counting the months till the hangman. The jury, if you could dignify that gang of lowlife informers and political pimps by that name, convicted him of murdering a mine foreman. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he did. Down in the darkness, down at the breaker, close on the midnight hour, steadily working, quietly leaving, trailing a thin line of powder. Little Schuylkill Valley town is all lit up tonight, with flames that lick like tongues from the breaker fire. Tight-lipped coal and iron police won't get much sleep tonight, looking for the sons of Molly Maguire. down in the tavern, banded together. Strong men are hiding their sorrow. Over at Pottsville, there at the prison, 6 men are hanging tomorrow. I only tried to organize the men I worked among. I'm hanging in the morning, will you miss me? Monday early, so they say, the mines will open back, and the coal and iron police are drinking whiskey. Down in the darkness, standing together, 6 men are lying on the gallows, holding a red rose, waiting for sunrise. King of the Molly's Jack Leo. The trap is sprung and Molly's sons are traveling into time, murdered by the men who come to hang her. The unborn souls of Union men are all with her tonight, and the Pennsylvania pits are dark with anger. Pennsylvania's Day of the Rope. It was in the headlines of every newspaper in America. Oh, you better believe I read every word of those stories. Everyone in the country was talking about it. Honest workers and greedy rich people alike. 6 men were hanged at Pottsville. 4 at Mochunk. Every one of them died denying any guilt. Alexander Campbell, just before he was led to the scaffold, left his muddy handprint on his cell wall to stay there for eternity as proof of his innocence. Now, they've tried for 50 years to scrub it out, but it's there to this day. Every man that went to the scaffold in those days, and in the days to come, was an Irishman. Whatever crime they were tried for and convicted of, what they were really arrested for was being secret members of the Molly Maguires. Well, goddamn right they were secret members. No one in their right mind would come out and say he was a member of an underground organization that blew up mines, assassinated mine foremen, beat, shot, and stabbed strikebreakers, and threw their bodies down abandoned mine shafts. No, you'd have to be crazy to say that out loud. Just to be suspected of being a Molly Maguire was an open invitation for the coal company gun thugs to ambush you, beat you near half to death, and then throw your body down abandoned mine shafts. Slit your throat just to teach you a lesson. You know, it was just like that when I was organizing in those same Pennsylvania hard coal fields. Suppose a union miner was walking down the road and got stopped by a coal and iron police roadblock with a machine gun pointed straight at his chest. Now, they will ask him if he's a union member and even if he's a Molly Maguire. Well, if he said yes, he was just a goddamn fool. Of course, they probably shot him anyway, Pennsylvania being what it was in those days. But the Molly Maguires say they didn't start out in Pennsylvania, no. They started out in Ireland, the time of the land clearances. The hard men that the Protestant lords hired, the same kind of lowlifes that later became members of the coal and iron police. They would go to a Catholic tenant family's hut in the middle of the night. And first thing, they would set the thatched roof on fire. And when those terrified people raced out to escape the flames, those gun thugs would beat them near half to death if they didn't murder them outright. Then they tore down the mud walls to the hut and drove those poor unfortunates off the Lord's land. out of the county, and sometimes all the way to the Pennsylvania hard coal fields. Oh, it didn't take long before the Catholics began to fight back. Young Catholic men would blacken their faces and dress up in women's clothing and give back as good as their neighbors and kinfolk were getting. Every time a manor house burned or a Protestant lord was found dead by the side of the road, the whisper went about that it was the sons of Molly Maguire that had done the deed. Some say she was a young widow who vowed revenge after being driven from her home. The young men who claimed her as their leader whispered that she had a fearsome, warlike appearance that struck fear into the hearts of any British lord, land agent, or gun thug unlucky enough to cross her path. Some say she wore red petticoats, so that even under cover of darkness, you would know it was Molly Maguire herself coming to meet you and really about to strike you down. Oh, can you imagine red petticoats on a woman my age? Oh my. Well, a uniform is a good thing to have, even if it means wearing the same thing every day. Even at a distance, people will see it and know who's coming to meet them for better or worse. No one but her boys ever claimed to have seen Molly Maguire in the flesh. No policeman ever took her into custody. No jury ever tried her. No jail cell ever held her. No hangman ever led her to the gallows. Maybe she was a living woman, maybe she wasn't. But real or not, Molly Maguire was the most dangerous woman in Ireland in those bitter days. Ireland. I started out life in Ireland as Mary Harris. I was born in Cork, the rebel city. In 1851, when I was 14 years old, we moved to Toronto when I was with my family, and my first job was at St. Mary's School in Monroe, Michigan. Can you believe it? St. Mary's School. Mother Jones, the most dangerous woman in America, who can cuss a blue streak, tell off-color jokes with the best of them, and drink the toughest miner in West Virginia under the table, started out teaching at a convent school. Well, as you can imagine, that job didn't last long. You've never even heard of Monroe, have you? No, there's good reason for that. Neither is anyone else, now or back then. But everybody had heard of Memphis, the biggest town on the Mississippi River between Minneapolis and the Gulf of Mexico. Railroads hauled cotton from hundreds of miles on either side of the river straight into Memphis. And on the docks, black stevedores loaded white bales onto barges that floated down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. And from there, shipped out to cotton mills all over the South and all over the world. With all that river and railroad trade, Memphis was one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and they needed school teachers, and they were willing to pay more than a pittance. So I left Monroe and I went to Memphis. Oh, it was a sight to behold. With the plantation owners and the railroad barons and the bootleggers, and their pet politicians. They ran Memphis like it was their own candy store. How many times have you seen a candidate for election coming toward you with a smile as wide as the Mississippi River, right arm outstretched so far it's a wonder he doesn't dislocate his shoulder? In Memphis, when a man running for office offered you his hand, it was always palm up, so you could put something respectable in it. Then he would fold his fingers down over whatever you put in there so it didn't blow away in the high wind from the river. Every member of the Tennessee legislature owed the whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Well, you better believe those whiskey barons and railroad bosses made sure those debts were paid before the next election rolled around. If living was a thing that money could buy, the rich would live and the poor would die. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Let the rich man live and the poor man bust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Are you loyal to the Constitution? Are you looking for a contribution? Here's a little present from the boys in the pack, from the river of whiskey and the solid gold track. Let's have a hand for the railroad track. Let's have a hand for the boys in the back. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Let the rich man live and the poor man bust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Are you praying for the resurrection? Are you running in the next election? Here's a little something that uses it shoots from the solid gold engine and the river of booze. A hand on your shoulder means you're one of us. A hand in your pocket means the railroad trust. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Let the rich man live and the poor man bust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Are you of a pure and lofty nature? Do you make a bundle from the legislature? Here's some provisions for the campaign trail, from the bottles of bourbon and the silvery rail. Pickles and glue and any old thing. Let's have a hand for the whiskey ring. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust, with the whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Let the rich man live and the poor man bust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Let the rich man live and the poor man bust, with a whiskey ring and the railroad trust. Well, I got to Memphis about just shortly before war broke out between the North and the South. I hadn't been there long when I met and married George Jones. Oh, a good Union man. I gave birth to 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. In 1867, the yellow fever epidemic that swept the South after the Civil War arrived on our doorstep. Have you ever seen anyone die of yellow fever? It's a terrible way to die. I watched not just 1, but 5. In 6 short days, I lost all 4 of my children and my husband. All due to the rich men who owned and ran Memphis. Well, now, you might be asking, how can it be the rich who took your children, your husband away from you? But think about it. When the yellow fever epidemic swept into Memphis, who do you think died? Oh, not the rich. No. They were safe and sound, tucked away in their mansions high on the bluffs above the Mississippi River. But the poor, the working people, we didn't have mansions to hide in. No, We lived in what everyone called the bottoms, the flat places along the banks of the Mississippi that were sometimes half dry and sometimes half underwater, living all crammed and cramped, piled on top of each other, 6, 10, 14 to a room. Nothing but filthy water to drink and raw sewage running down the sides of the street. Crowds everywhere and all the time. But the rich in their mansions were smoking cigars and drinking champagne and talking about the trash down there in the bottoms. Oh, why don't these people even try to better themselves? Oh, no, they like living like that. It's all they've ever known. Honestly, if you give them a decent place to live in half a month, they'll have it looking like a cattle shed. Oh, they're happiest living with their own kind. They wouldn't move out of the bottoms if they could. As if George and I would move out of the bottoms in a heartbeat if we'd had the chance. But the rich owned the foundry where George worked, and even with the union, they barely paid him enough to put food on our table. And those times when not enough work came into the foundry, he didn't even get that. There were weeks when it was all we could do to scrape by. If my George had been paid just the smallest part of what his labor was worth, we might have been able to get out of the bottoms and move to someplace just a little bit safer, a little bit cleaner, where drinking water came out of a faucet instead of a bucket and human waste went into a sewer instead of the sides of the street. If we had been able to get out to higher ground, George and my children... Real hard times. A day's work wasn't worth a dime. You never got to eat your fill, but they never went hungry in the houses on the hill. Good and bad times came and went. Money earned was money spent. In my dreams, I'm restless still, but they never get worried in the houses on the hill. Houses on the hill, your whitewashed fences kept you from the town below. Your polished windows look down on company houses row on row. Just wanted you to know that if I could turn this world around, I'd see this place turn upside down. The bosses sweating in the mill, my kids living in the houses on the hill. But it's far better that I lost them than that they lost both me and George to become orphans at so young an age. Motherless children in a city that had already lost so many of its own. Even dead and buried, they still had a mother to remember them. What did I have? In my heart, I was still a mother. I had heard my little children laughing just days before the yellow fever swept them away from me. I can still hear their cries as they lay there in agony, too young to know what was happening to them. Fever, delirious, vomiting up black blood, bleeding from every opening in their bodies, crying out to me, "Mother, mother, mother, help me, please, please help me." And my lastborn married a name for me, too young for speech, screaming and crying, staring at me, begging me with her eyes to stop the pain, to please stop the pain. My poor George. Mary, Mary, Mary. Mother, Mother, mother. Then the pain stopped. The cries, the convulsions, the delirium. And there was nothing but silence from my husband, my children. Everything stopped. My heart, my breath, my home, my life. I ran. For the first and only time in my life, I ran. Away from Memphis, away from heartbreak, away from memories, back to what I had known before the yellow fever tore the heart out of my chest, back to dressmaking. It was a trade that I had learned from my grandmother. Not to a classroom, not to teaching where day after day I would have to look into those young faces and remember. I sewed dresses for the rich. Aye, Mother Jones sewed dresses for the rich. I sat in their mansions on Chicago's Lakeshore Drive, looking out at Lake Michigan and the hundreds of tiny fires on the shores, and the homeless men and women huddling around the flames to keep from freezing to death. Oh, Mary. The mayor has invited our whole family to the mansion for dinner. Oh, I simply must shine for my husband's sake. Only an alderman now, but, in 10 years, my Edward, mayor of Chicago, something in silk and satin, trimmed in velvet. And Mary, for my little daughter who turns 5 on Sunday, something to make her even more beautiful than she already is. Oh, ribbons and bows just everywhere, so she and I might shine together. Oh, Mary, I so wish you had children of your own. Morning has broken like ice on the lake. Out on the sidewalk, the children are passing, far from their tenements, hungry and cold. Warm in this window, I stitch and sew, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Fingers that ache and a heart that is bleeding, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Watching the children, I stitch and sew. Wind from the lake rises angry with snow. Out on the street where the jobless are standing, shaking and shivering, bitter and old. Safe in this mansion, I stitch and sew, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Driving the needle through layers of velvet, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Eyes on the distance, I stitch and sew. Back in the drawing room, laughter rings out. There where the lords and the ladies are preening, satins and silks worked in patterns so fine. No word escapes me, I stitch and sew, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Pulling the cloth till the needles are breaking, stitch and sew, stitch and sew. Listening and learning, I stitch and sew. Far in the mountain where blood marks the cold, down in the shaft a fire is growing. Closer and closer it comes to our lights. Waiting for justice, I stitch and sew, stitch and sew, stitch and sew, rolling the thread till the silk is on fire. Fire! Fire! There are flames everywhere. No, it's not the mine that's exploded. It's not this thread that's in flames. It's Chicago that's burning. The entire city going up in smoke. My dying children's cries. No, it's living children's cries that pierce my ears. Their panicked hearts pounding as they trample over each other, racing toward the lake, toward safety. There is no safety ever for our kind, not this night, nor any other night. I stood in Lake Michigan for a night, a day, and a night. Winter water up to my knees. Thousands of people crowding around me, shivering and shaking from the bitter cold, screaming, crying as the still white, hot embers lifting, flying from the burning, dying city, fell, settling on their clothes and setting them on fire. Then it was morning. The flames were gone. I walked the dead streets. 15,000 buildings gone to ashes. Nothing but memories. Oh, my dressmaking shop, my bed, my chair, my dresser, my scissors, needles, and pins, measuring tapes. My life. Nothing. 34 years old. Nothing. In the part of town where Chicago's poor and working people huddled together, piled on top of each other, only a few buildings survived. One of them was the Knights of Labor Hall, scorched, but still standing. I went there, almost without knowing why. I stayed. I worked day after day with hundreds of people who had lost everything, who were still so shocked they couldn't even speak. I learned how to connect their pain to mine, how to sit silently until the agony they'd been beating down inside them broke through and they would begin to talk. Slowly at first. But then the words, the gasps, the tears were tumbling out of them like the flames bursting from their burning tenement windows. Oh, it took me a little while to learn how to talk to people who were hurting, who were in need. Yeah, that's different than when you're talking with a friend over the back fence, or you don't even have to think about what you're going to say next. The conversation just rolls and rises like the smoke off the foundry. But when there's a goal to your conversation, and you need to accomplish something, and you know what that is, you have to think about every sentence, every word, before you even say it. Well, suppose I'm sitting down to talk with an Irish miner in some coal camp up near Carbondale in northeastern Pennsylvania. That's where a lot of the Irish ended up. Now, my goal is to get him to walk out and join the strike, but that's not where I start. First, I give him a big smile and I say, "Hey, what county are you from then?" "County Clare," says he. Well, now you know that I'm from County Cork. Well, but I'm not going to tell him that. Ireland, I say. Oh, it's a wonderful country if it wasn't for the hard times there. Well, and here. Now, you see, he and I are from the same place, wherever that place might happen to be. You know, you and I, we might be second cousins once removed for all we know. I pause, and I let him think about what I just said. And when I sense that he's ready to go on, I say, you know, I've had a couple of kinfolk that needed to be removed, and a couple of hard cases you had to remove them. Removing them once wasn't enough. You had to do it all over again a second time. Now he'll laugh, and just long enough to forget his fear of the gun thugs and the bosses. Just long enough to listen to me, maybe even answer back. Now, maybe he'll walk out and join the strike. Maybe he won't, but he's listened. He'll remember what I said. That's how you talk when you're organizing the working class. You never lie. Yeah, well, because if you do, one day that lie will creep up from behind and bite you in a heartbeat. When you're working with desperate people, the truth has to stay close to the ground. It has to be cut and sewed to fit the person. Just like when I was sewing ballroom dresses for those rich ladies on Chicago's Lakeshore Drive and finery for their husbands. Oh, it never would have done to make a working man's suit of clothes for one of those captains of industry, like the suit of clothes that I sewed to bury my poor George in. It was my memories of George, I suppose, that took me back time and again to the nights of Labor Hall, even when I wasn't needed to help. I'd sit in that wooden chair with my eyes closed, and I would listen to all the very best speakers, trying to learn and understand how they could grab the attention of every woman and man in the room, holding on to it till they decided it was time to let it go. But the part of the meeting that I liked the best was the singing. The honest, upraised voices of working people always gives me heart and hope. Blessed are the weak, blessed are the poor, blessed those who love their neighbor. Blessed are the children, blessed are the meek, blessed are all those who labor. Lift up your hearts, lift up your voice, come to the great reunion. Give us your hand, join in our band. You are the you in union. Scattered and tossed, battered and lost, all of these years divided. Each one is precious, each plays a part. When we are all united, lift up your eyes, lift up your voice, come to the great reunion. Give us your hand, join in our band. You are the you in union. For from our birth, promise this earth, let us unite and share it. Sing along. Seeking for justice here in this world, we shall one day inherit. Lift up your eyes, lift up your voice, come to the great reunion. Give us your hand, join in our band. are the UN Union. I sat stock still in that hard wooden chair, with my eyes closed, but my heart open to my bitter memories. Suddenly, it was no longer 1871 or Chicago or the Knights of Labor Hall, but the year was 1861, Memphis, and the hall belonged to the local 66 of the International Iron Molders Union. It was the largest union in the country at that time. Oh, I didn't know anything about unions back then, beyond the occasional conversation I'd overheard from time to time in the parlors of those rich men where I sat stitching and sewing ballroom gowns for their wives and daughters. They talked scornfully about how terrible the unions were, how they were destroying this country, how they were un-American, and they were making life impossible for the honest businessman. Honest. And I didn't go to my first union meeting out of solidarity. No. I was still Mary Harris, a school teacher, 24 years old, a good Catholic girl from County Cork, Ireland. Unions didn't mean anything to me. Oh. I went because I knew after the meeting there would be a dance. Oh. I mean, I'd only been in Memphis a short time, and I knew hardly anyone in the city, and I wanted to meet someone. You, wipe that smile off your face, or I will wipe it off for you. All right. I admit it. I didn't want to meet someone. I wanted to meet a man. I'd never been with a man, and I thought it was damn well time. Oh, it was different for women back then, especially for women from Ireland, and more than ever, for those women who had mothers like mine. Now, my mother, you see, our neighbors in Cork would occasionally leave home to go to church. My mother occasionally left church to come home. Most immigrants, when they arrived in this country, came with just the shirt on their back. But my mother, along with her two threadbare dresses, packed enough religious fervor to keep a medium-sized monastery warm in winter. Oh, she was as strict as she was pious. She noticed how, when I was just 12 years old, how men would look at me, not straight ahead, mind, but from head to ankle and back up again slowly. She saw how they would follow me with their eyes. And when I had passed by, they would look at each other and smile, whistle, rub their thighs. She guarded me like an eagle guards its young. Everywhere I went, in Toronto, herself or one of my brothers had to go with me. When I was finally allowed to leave home, it was to go teach at that convent school where the nuns looked over me even more than my mother ever did. But now, here I am in Memphis, alone, staring at this handsome young man striding across the small Union Hall stage, exciting the crowds with his eloquence and passion. Ooh, I was getting a little excited myself in more ways than one. You know what I mean? As his eyes would sweep the room, I could swear he was looking straight at me. Oh, and he was too. He told me later. He would shift his gaze, not to look into my eyes, but to look at my hands to see if I was wearing a wedding ring. Well, he finished his speech to cheers and applause, and then he held up his hand for silence. And then he said, "And now, Let's dance! And as the crowds cleared the chairs back to the walls, he walked straight over to where I was sitting, stood there in his stained, soiled workman's clothes. He took my hand and kissed it. And then he said in a voice that smelled of Ireland, "May I have this dance?" In that instant, I knew what I was going to do, that my sainted mother would never know. My mother's life led from the house to the church to pray and to raise up a family. But here in this country I work on my own, for I had left Ireland behind me, for I had left Ireland behind me. One night after work at the Union Hall dance, I noticed a man from the foundry, a fiery young rebel no priest would approve. But I had left Ireland behind me. Yes, I had left Ireland behind me. He turned in his seat and he gave me a glance. He said, "Sure, Mary Harris, you'll give us a dance." I looked at him once and I never looked back as we waltzed away down the river. Through that long night, I never once thought of the mother who raised me so gently, for the heat of the foundry burned deep in his eyes. And I had left Ireland behind me. Yes, I had left Ireland behind me. George Jones. George Jones. The fiery young rebel who swept me off my feet onto the dance floor and into another life. George Jones. The man who became my first lover, my husband, and father to my 4 lost children. George was a foundry worker. He was a molder at the Union Iron Works and Machine Shop in Memphis. Yeah, union indeed. Well, there was a union at the foundry, and George was a member, a strong one at that. Foundry work is as dangerous as any trade can be. But every member of the working class lives with daily danger. The tree that falls too fast in the wrong direction. The crane cable that snaps suddenly. The molten iron that spills from the ladle and into your boot. The twister in the cotton mill that grabs you by the hair and pulls you into the machine and the skin from your scalp. I love every member of the working class, but it was the coal miners who claimed a special hold on my heart. I no longer have children of my own, but now I have 400,000 children, for every coal miner that's ever lived is a child of mine. My boys, I call them. Oh, and they have a name for me too. They call me Mother. Well, them and everyone else. Even Warren G. Harding, President of the United States, calls me Mother. Now, of course, to my face, the newspapers, when they're writing articles about me, well, they always call me Mother Jones, but every last miner, every mill and cannery worker, even every sheriff, every judge and prosecuting attorney calls me mother. And I call the miners my boys. Whether it's in a secret meeting in a corner of a coal camp at the head of a holler where you have to wade 10 miles up a creek just to get there. I sit with them in some shotgun shack the coal company calls a house, matching them drink for drink, using language that would make a priest cover his ears, telling dirty stories that make my boys double over with laughter. Oh, I stand with them on a picket line with the gun thugs swinging their high-powered rifles, just waiting for a chance to shoot. Or in the depth of a mine where I am sneaking in to organize the men below, I sit right there alongside them in one of those little rooms they carved out of the coal on the side of the main tunnel. I sit right there with the light from their carbide lamps glinting off their blackened faces. And I say to them, boys, God damn it to hell! You've got to do what mother tells you to do, or I'm gonna rip the balls off your body with my bare hands. Yes, mother, they say. Even though I'm talking to them in ways that no mother ever would or ever will. Oh, I can't battle with my fist, but I sure can fight with words. Strong words. Harsh words, sometimes hard words when that's what's needed. Cowards, I call them, when they won't do right. Weak, lily-livered, goddamn cowards, lower than a snake crawling on its belly. Well, now you know a man can't stand to be talked to like that. If there was another man who said those words, they wouldn't be fighting words, they'd be killing words. They'd be go for your knife, your pistol, your miner's pick, whatever weapon happens to be closest to hand words. They'd be, you sorry-ass son of a bitch, nobody talks to me like that words. They'd be, only one of us is going to walk out of here alive words. But when your mother talks to you like that, what are you going to do? Shoot her for insulting your manhood? Is some miner whose pride I've wounded for telling him the truth about his own cowardice going to order me to step outside so we can settle it with our fists? How's that going to look? Huh? Some 40-year-old miner pummeling his 70-year-old mother. You think his friends are going to stand around and say, yeah, hit her again, hit her again? No, he's not going to do any sort of thing like that. He is going to drop his eyes to the ground. He's going to put his hands at his sides, and he is going to stand quietly, and he will say, yes, mother, because he knows if he doesn't, I will shame him till kingdom come. Your mother never talked to you like that, did she? Yeah, but if she did, you would do what she told you to do, wouldn't you? Of course you would. Oh, but the women of the coal camps, the mothers, the sisters, the wives, they live in their own special hell. I mean, every day they pack the dinner pails for their husbands and wave them off down the road to the mine. Their hearts grow tight with fear. All the long shift. They listen for the shriek of the mine whistle, the scream of the explosion. They watch for the cloud of dust and fire breaking from the mine mouth, billowing over the drowsy camp. Startled from sleep, they grab their babies and they race headlong down the road to the mine, joining together with handfuls, dozens, hundreds of other women, all choking down the nausea tearing at their insides, the bile rising in their throat, each thinking the same thing silently. Am I a widow now? At 27, the only support for 6 young children. Where will I go 3 days from now when the coal company turns me out of my company house because company houses are only for those who work in the mines and their families? Worn and ragged from birthing and raising all these children, will I ever find another man? Every day, every night, they watch, they wait, they listen, while the rage smolders inside them, like those mine fires up in Carbondale that have burned underground for the last 100 years. I took the rage that lives in the heart of every working class woman and I built an army out of it. I became commanding general of a women's mop and broom army with women with fire in their bellies and rage in their heart. Time after time, company town after company town, I led my troops into combat. Have you ever seen 2,000 women marching straight at you, bent on battle? Faces fierce, voices violent, hair shuddering in the wind, brandishing brooms on their way to the mine mouth, hands tight, knuckles white on the handles of their murderous mops. Oh, who wouldn't break and run in the face of such an avenging army? A strikebreaker tries to sneak past our line. The business end of a broom, a hickory handle 2 inches thick, hits the back of his head. If he ever gets up, he will think twice before he scabs again. Now, sometimes my mop and broom army would drag scabs, black and white strikebreakers from that the coal companies had shipped in from hundreds of miles away, and they would march right in there. Well, sometimes it was their own husbands, their own brothers, that were too afraid to walk out on strike with the rest of my boys. Well, my mop and broom army, they turned the table on them. Now the men were afraid that if they didn't walk out on strike, their own grandmother might march in there and drag them out by the feet, the hair, the crotch, whatever body part happened to be closest to grab first. So out the men came, of course, of their own free will. You know, if George Washington had had an army of women, the Revolutionary War would have been over before it started. No, of course, sometimes we ran into more firepower than we could handle. At one Pennsylvania town, the sheriff overran our positions, took us prisoners of war, made us surrender our weapons, stack our mops and our brooms just like they were rifles, marched us straight from the field of battle to the jail, didn't even stop at the courthouse. Some of the women had babies with them, little tiny children in arms. It couldn't be left at home alone, so those babies got locked up along with us. Well, now, they might have confiscated our brooms and our mops, but they hadn't taken away all our weapons. Standing on the picket line, poking at the scabs, sheriff said he'd teach us right from wrong. $30, 30 days, that judge, he wrote us down. Sitting in our narrow cell, we sang the whole night long. Jail can't hold my body down. Chains can't turn my soul around. I'm singing through the bars, flying free among the moon and stars. Jail can't hold my body down. Locked up in that prison with our children by our sides, we sang just like cats let loose in hell. Slept all day, sang all night, the judges were awake. Sent down for the sheriff, and he opened up that cell. Jail can't hold my body down. Chains can't turn my soul around. I'm singing through the bars, flying free among the moon and stars. Jail can't hold my body down. Have you known the freedom of voices joined together? Have you felt the power in that sound? While there is a soul in prison, we shall not be free. While there is a song in prison, we shall not be bound. Jail can't hold my body
so proud. I'm singing through the bars, flying free among the moon and stars. Jail can't hold my body down.
I suppose it was my being commanding general of the Women's Mop and Broom Army that made a West Virginia prosecutor call me the most dangerous woman in America. I do appreciate the honor. I worked hard for it. Molly Maguires might have been the most dangerous woman in Ireland during her days, but Mother Jones was damn sure the most dangerous woman in the United States of America. The prosecutor who called me that did not begin to understand the reality. It's all women who are dangerous, not just any one woman, no matter how radical or outspoken she may be. When women are organized together, we become truly powerful, more explosive than a bundle of dynamite with a 6-inch fuse. Oh. Most men think that a woman's place is in the home, or forced to work in some filthy laundry 14, 16 hours a day, or with the boss putting his hand up her dress, threatening to fire her if he can't have his way with her. What could be more cowardly? Yet those men think they're the ones with courage. Well, I will tell you something about the women of the working class. We're tougher than men, and we don't give a good goddamn who knows it. Some men can be brave under fire. I'll grant them that. I saw that at the Battle of Blair Mountain, where for 3 days, 10,000 armed miners shot it out with an army of gun thugs paid for by the coal operators. But for the most part, men only show courage when other men are watching. When they're afraid of being shamed in front of their comrades. You know, if shame were to disappear from the world overnight, a lot of men's so-called courage would evaporate right along with it. As much as I love my boys, as much as I love the women of the Mop and Broom armies, yet were the children that were my passion. They broke my heart. I don't need to tell you why. The tragedy of these children's lives would move any stones, unless those stones happen to be the hearts of the filthy rich men who owned not just the mines, but the mills. Girls as young as 6 years old would go to work as mothers' helpers in the mills, working 14 hours a day. No school this morning, the whistle's blowing. Children by 2s and 3s coming down the hill, out of their childhood into the world for good, out of the schoolyard into the mill. Silk and satin, no time for dreaming. The dawn is breaking, 12-hour shift starts soon. Ribbon and lace, go take your place within the shadows of this spinning room. Dressed in her mother's shirt, too small to reach her work, worn as the wooden box on which she stands. Torn from her books and games, she stares at her spinning frame. The threads of childish laughter break in her hands. Silk and satin, no time for dreaming. The dawn is breaking, 12-hour shift starts soon. Ribbon and lace, go take your place within the shadows of this spinning room. Seasons don't shift in here, fog doesn't lift in here, snow doesn't drift in here. When the nights turn cold, wind doesn't blow in here, rivers don't flow in here, children don't grow in here, they just get old. I couldn't let those children suffer like that. So, when 100,000 silk mill workers in eastern Pennsylvania went out on strike, 17,000 of them children, I decided to organize a children's crusade to let the nation know about the shame of child labor. I made plans to lead 200 children from Philadelphia to Sagamore Hill, Teddy Roosevelt's summer home on Oyster Bay, Long Island. At each of the small towns and crossroads along the way, we got the local unions to organize places to sleep and food to eat. And at every crossroads, we would gather the biggest crowds we could and agitate them with fiery speeches. And then we got those little children with the missing limbs and missing hands to go out and pass the hat among the crowd to raise money to support the strike. I knew from the start that President Roosevelt wouldn't be there. I mean, really, think about it. If you knew that Mother Jones, along with 200 children, most of them terribly crippled, was making a plan to stop by your house on a Sunday afternoon for tea, along with dozens of reporters, would you be crazy enough to stay home? No. You would get the first limousine out of town. Well, here's what you need to understand. It wasn't important for the children to meet President Roosevelt. What mattered was for the nation to see the children. Now, if I had really wanted the children to meet President Roosevelt, I simply would have called his secretary and made an appointment. We would have taken the children from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. by train. We would have spent 15 minutes sipping tea with Teddy at the White House, and we would have all been home by supper time. Now, and why didn't I take 100 grown men and women instead of so many children? God only knows I could have found 10,000 workers with crushed or missing limbs or other injuries too terrible to mention. But a woman with a missing hand, a man with an amputated leg, gets no sympathy. The better class of people just look at her stump and they say, oh, well, she should have been more careful. Man with a missing leg? Oh, probably drunk on the job. Yeah. Oh, what do you expect from that class of people? Well, lose a hand or a limb, you know. I mean, they just got what they deserved. You know what those people are like? Those people. Those Irish. Those Hungarians. Those Italians. Those Jewish. Those Polish. But what those rich people really said was those micks, those hunkies, those Dagos, those kikes. Those Polacks, class anger of the rich. But a girl of 10, blinded when a shuttle flew off a spinning frame, a mill girl of 8 with a missing leg, a breaker boy of 12 with no fingers. Oh, let's see you harden your hearts now, you upper-class sons of bitches. The president has a summer home, a mansion made made of brick and stone, that's built upon the broken bones of the children of this land. While the president's at play, frolicking on Oyster Bay, these children work 12 hours a day, risking thumbs and hands. See where the children come, playing on the fife and drum. Battles are lost and won on the road to Oyster Bay. Long may our land be bright, with freedom's holy light. Where will they sleep tonight on the children's crusade? When children go to work, not school, and babies learn to spin and spool, then gold has bought the golden rule, and justice is a shill. Who will raise a voice or hand to save this stooped and shivering band from greed that hangs upon the land like smoke above the mill? Children all stooped and bowed, too scared to laugh out loud. Where is your freedom now on the road to Oyster Bay? My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. What good is that to me on the children's crusade? And you who own these dungeon mills and trade in childhood, buy and sell, and make of work a living hell where children smolder still. If by chance there still remains some human blood within your veins, then hear the cry, break the chains of the children of the mill. Land of the pulse's pride, where children worked and died, we will not be denied on the road to Oyster Bay. Freedom will ring again, children will sing again. Baptist is at the end of the children's crusade. The children's crusade. The children's crusade. It failed. Of course, I pretended it was a grand success. I gave speeches all over the country about the Children's Crusade to cheering crowds and standing ovations. Nothing changed. The strike was broken and the children of the silk mills went back to work. But even in defeat, those women and children of the silk mills and the coal camps, they never forgot Mother Jones. I fought for them. I stood by them when no one else would. They will remember me for the rest of their lives. They will, won't they? For every working class woman who would follow me anywhere, there was a rich upper class woman who hated me. Well, that was no surprise. I mean, think about it. Most of them were only rich because they'd married into money. Where did that money come from? Not the mills, the mines, the shirtwaists and garment makers, the factories, the foundries, the laundries, the distilleries, the railroads that their husbands owned. Oh. Their wealth came from the sweat and blood of the workers who labored in poodles. Those collars they decked with precious gems and glittering diamonds and sapphires. God only knows why they asked me to speak with them, but they did. They even threw a special dinner in my honor. at a fancy hotel ballroom in New York City. 500 society women, all waiting to hear Mother Jones. Well, the evening started out pleasantly enough. My mother raised me with good manners that any Catholic girl should have. I know how to use them when I want to. I told the assembled crowd about the Trapper Boys and the Breaker Boys, the Mill Girls, the Children's Crusade, the young women forced into prostitution to help feed their families. I could see tears rolling down their face onto their silken blouses. When I finished speaking, they all sprang to their feet, cheering and clapping so loudly, I thought the chandelier was going to crash down on all of us like a slate fall from the mine. Then finally the chairwoman got all 500 of them to sit and quiet down. Then she asked for questions. The first woman to stand asked, Mother Jones, where do you stand on the question of women's suffrage? That's when all hell broke loose. I have known women who scrubbed on their hands and their knees, cleaning the floors in the mansions where riches are born. I have known women who sewed till their fingers were bleeding, stitching the gowns for the dances where power is worn. I have known women who slaved all their lives, asking no more than the chance to survive. Will their lives be better when we have votes for the women? Will their work be easier when we have suffrage at last? Upper-class ladies all necklaced and jeweled, well-chosen words, manners so fine. Who will they vote for, the proud union miner or their husband's good friend who invests in the mine? I have known women whose bodies were broken by violence. There in the laundry, the factory, the home, and the mill. I have known women who suffered their lives out in silence. Who will speak up for them? Who will stand up with them still? I have known women who stood by their men, only to lose them again and again. Will their lives be better when we have votes for the women? Will their bodies be healed by the men who take office next time? Elegant ladies with poodles and furs, springtime in France, summer in Spain. Who are they friend to, the working class woman or the owner whose leather glove fist holds the chain? I have known women who slept on the floor in a blanket, giving their bed up so I could have rest for the night. I have known women who marched against high-powered rifles, stared down their barrel, dared them to fire and fight. I have known women whose courage and anger gave them a moment of honor and pride. Will they give up allegiance to class that sustained them? their faith in the strike and each other that held back the pain. For a small piece of paper without even one woman on it. For a thin paper ballot that won't even mention their name. Let me set the record straight. I have never been against the vote for women when there was someone or something worth voting for. I have worked for progressive candidates. I have encouraged other women to work for them. Yes, working class women need to vote, but we need to vote with our voices, our feet, our fists. A mop and broom brigade and a mine mouth, a strike of 1,000 women for union recognition gets more done and speaks more loudly than a piece of paper at a ballot box. When women do get the vote, who do you think these wealthy women are going to vote for? If John D. Rockefeller runs for president against Eugene Debs, who do you think Teddy Roosevelt's mother is going to vote for? No. Give me industrial democracy. The organized power of the working class, not the false democracy of the ballot box. I've been on the road for 50 years. Colorado, California, Arizona, Mexico, Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Oklahoma, Texas, New York, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, British Columbia. I've organized coal, copper, and iron miners, machinists and mill workers, shirtwaist and garment makers, brewers, smelters, shipyard hands, every one of my class. I always went back to West Virginia and my boys. In the end, they turned against me. It was just after Sheriff Sid Hatfield, a member of the Miners' Union, had been murdered and ambushed, murdered on the steps of the county courthouse by the Baldwin Felts guards. That was the last straw for my boys. Thousands of them picked up their rifles and they marched straight into Mingo County. The governor of West Virginia was a friend of mine, and he told me privately that my boys were marching into a death trap that the coal operators had set for them. I couldn't let that happen, could I? So I talked to my boys. I told them they had to turn back. I even read them a letter from the president promising them that if they put down their weapons and went home, he would get the gunman out of West Virginia. The union leaders, they demanded to see the telegram, and I refused to show it to them. If men can't trust their mother, who can they trust? Well, they called the White House and they found out the truth. There was a telegram, but the president didn't write it. I did. I sent it myself. That's why I couldn't show it to them. My boys marched straight past me on to the Battle of Blair Mountain. But I had to do what I did. They said I'd gone soft. They said that the governor had sweet-talked me into betraying my class. Traitor, they hissed as they marched by, with their eyes turned away. But I had to work with them. I mean, the governor wasn't using me like the miners had said. He was simply took me into his confidence. He was trying to keep the peace. He was trying to keep my boys from being slaughtered. I had to work with him. What good is a mother if she can't keep her children from dying? Nobody really knows how many of my boys died on the mountain. But when they found out that my boys had turned against me, my longtime enemies, they came after me with a vengeance. You see, the rich men who own and run this country had seen to the defeat of Germany, so they decided that they would turn to destroying what they called the enemy within. The unions and the radicals. If you were born here like Eugene Debs, they just threw you in prison for sedition. If you were an immigrant like Emma Goldman, they just deported you. They sent federal troops to break strikes. They broke the back of radicalism, and too many of our best with it. Now, these so-called labor leaders, they saw the writing on the wall, and they wanted to have their bread buttered on the other side. Now, instead of railing at the rich capitalists, they sat down to dinner with them at private clubs. A labor peace, they called it, but it was a peace of surrender. It was not a peace of victory. It was a peace without justice. There are men of power riding in their private Pullman cars with their watch chains and their diamonds, their port wine and cigars. But the curtains on their coaches are like blinders on their eyes. They never see the suffering, they never hear the cries. These men who own the sweatshops, all dressed in Sunday finery, sit dining with their mothers, all draped in furs and courtesy, attentive to each woman's wish until silk hat in hand. They bow upon the parting step. How good to see you, mother. Every single worker is to a woman born. The mothers are esteemed and praised, the workers used and scorned. How can workers be exploited while their mothers are acclaimed? If motherhood is sacred, why are our children murdered, broken, maimed? And what now of this woman with no children she can claim, who will never hear an answer, though she calls them each by name? Her eyes grow bright with anger, her tongue is sharp with age, her heart swells up with loneliness, her blood runs hot with rage. There are coffins in the cutting room, shrouds upon the wooden stairs. There are marks on the machinery that are not the tracks of sweat or tears, but the blood of broken workers crying out for mercy. Each the child of a mother, each the victim of the factory. Let me cut them to the marrow. Let me weight them down with stones. Let me creep into their slumber. Let me chill them to the bones. As a worker, next to nothing. As a mother, nearly all. I drew the mystery of motherhood around me like a sword, a shield, a shawl. I draw the sanctity of motherhood around me like a sword, a shield, a shawl. Well, it's nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. I suppose we'd better call it a night. I know we're in heaven, but I haven't been here long enough to know if it's safe to walk these goddamn golden streets after midnight. You never know. One or two of those West Virginian gun thugs might have snuck in here while St. Peter was out on his lunch break. They might be looking for me right now. I'm glad you're here. You. And the other people like you. You're the future. Me and the other labor leaders I knew down on Earth, we're as old as I am. We're the past. Oh, besides, they think they've learned everything they need to know. And they stopped listening to Mother Jones a long time ago. But you're listening. I have been a radical for 50 years and more. Stood against the rich and greedy, for the workers and the poor. From Canada to Mexico, I traveled everywhere. Wherever trouble called me, I was there. Like stitches in a crazy quilt that women piece and sew. Wherever there was suffering, I was bound to go. With angry words for cowardice, comfort for despair. Wherever help was needed, I was there. I was there in the Depression when times were at their worst. But we had them where we wanted, like a dam about to burst. With fire in our bellies and revolution in the air. For a moment we saw clearly I was there. Sometimes I saw the issues in quite a different light. And old friends turned against me, but I never left the fight. When stones were in my pathway and my road was far from clear. Whether I chose right or wrongly, I was there. On a day when hope goes hungry and your dreams seem bound to fall, you may see me at the mill or just outside the Union Hall. When the clouds are empty promises, the sky a dark despair. Like an eagle from the mountain, I'll be there. And you, my brave young comrades, when the future sounds the call, will you be there for the battle? Will you answer one and all? When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll's called anywhere, will you stand and answer proudly, we're still here? Can you stand and answer proudly, I was there? I really must be going home now. George and the children are waiting for me.